So welcome to week 2 of this MOOC on the innocence movement. This week we're going to examine some of the systemic causes of wrongful convictions. What's most important to understand is that the phenomenon of wrongful convictions is not the result of a few bad cops or a few bad prosecutors. Rather, the causes are at the core of the criminal justice system. Wrongful convictions are often the result of the practices of good police officers who are employing accepted techniques of identification and interrogations that they've been taught and are well trained. They are the result of police and prosecutors responding to the public demands that they arrest, convict, and hold responsible someone in the aftermath of a horrible crime that shook the community. They are the result of police officers getting tunnel vision, focusing on only one possible suspect, and therefore failing to fully investigate a crime. They are the result of prosecutors who are more responsive to the societal and political demands that they secure convictions, rather than ensuring that they are convicting the right person or securing justice. They are the result of police and prosecutors and judges who refuse to admit that they or the system made a mistake. They are the result of defense attorneys who are overworked, under-resourced, or unqualified to investigate the issues and represent an individual charged with a serious crime. And they are the result of our society and our government failing to fund adequate resources for those without sufficient means who are charged with serious crimes. And finally, they are the result of a systemic, overt, and subtle classism and racism that perpetuates our society and our criminal justice system. Now, we've been able to discern some of the specific causes of wrongful conviction by studying the cases of those who have been exonerated to see what went wrong. And several patterns have emerged. The New York Innocence Project website offers a discussion of the 6 main causes: eyewitness misidentification, unvalidated or improper forensic science, false confessions and admissions, government misconduct, informants or snitches, and bad lawyering. Now, we're going to examine the scientific issues next week. This week, the 4 videos that are part of this session will examine the other 5 issues. Now, I just want to say a word about 2 of the leading causes of wrongful convictions: witness misidentification and false confessions, because these are the hardest causes for the general public to believe. Most people think that if a victim or an eyewitness to a crime identifies an individual as the perpetrator, that seals the case. We believe this, even though we all know that human memory is frail and inconsistent. Experts have identified that the primary reason for witness misidentification is because of the fragility of memory and procedures that the police use in having victims and witnesses identify a suspect. These methods include the use of live and photo lineups conducted by an administrator who knows which one the suspect is. The administrator, the police officer, may unwittingly or purposefully offer clues or reinforcement to a witness to encourage them to pick the suspect, and then to feel more confident about their identification, which affects their confidence in their identification as they move through the process, resulting in a higher level of confidence at the trial than they had at the original lineup. The instructions the administrator gives to the witness typically indicates that the suspect is in the lineup and do not really allow for the possibility that the perpetrator may not be included. There is subtle and overt pressure on the witness to identify a suspect. Now, most of these procedures are implemented by well-meaning police officers that are following official policies. Advocates for reform argue that in most cases it's not the police officers per se that are to blame for the misidentifications and wrongful convictions, but rather that it's the underlying policies and procedures. Nonetheless, many police departments have been reluctant or refused to change their policies and procedures. Courts and legislators as well have been resistant or refused to alter rules and laws to reduce the risk of misidentification and wrongful convictions, including the fact that many refuse to allow experts to testify about the problems inherent in memory and witness identification. There are a number of suggested reforms to witness identification in the links to this course, and I encourage you to consider them after you've watched the 4 videos that follow this introduction. I also want to say a quick word about false confessions. So many of us believe that we would never admit to a crime that we did not commit. We hold on to this so fiercely that we can't even conceive of circumstances that would cause someone to do this. However, an examination of the cases where DNA has proved that a person confessed to a crime that they did not do occurs in 25% of the cases. How is this possible? Why would someone ever confess to a crime that he or she didn't commit? If the person confessed at any point, he or she must have done it, right? Jurors feel this way too. A confession entered into evidence is extremely persuasive at trial and almost impossible to overcome. So again, we must ask, what would cause a person to confess to a crime that he or she didn't commit? The answer is simple and complicated. It's the police. Now, before 1936, police officers could beat a confession out of a suspect and then introduce that confession into court as evidence of guilt. We can probably all understand how a person might confess to a crime that he or she didn't commit if the police were physically torturing him or her, right? The Supreme Court outlawed that practice in 1936 in a case called Brown versus Mississippi. That ruling did not stop the police from using torture, as we know from the John Burge cases that occurred in Chicago, but it did begin to prevent the state from being able to introduce those confessions into evidence, the confessions that resulted from the torture. However, the court has only excluded confessions from physical torture, not mental or emotional torture. The primary reason for false confessions today is the accepted and widely used police coercive psychological interrogation tactics. Again, as in identification procedures, the tactics they employ are by well-trained and well-meaning police officers. Now, these techniques are powerful, and they work on every type of person, from those who are mentally retarded, to juveniles, to adults who are highly educated. The techniques include the Reed method of interrogation, which was developed by John Reed back in 1947. The Reed method continues to be widely used by local and federal officers in the United States and around the world. This method and other versions of psychological coercion to elicit confessions involve a series of steps. So the first step is to isolate the suspect, usually in a room designed to keep the suspect out of eyesight and earshot from their family and their friends. The rooms are small, cramped, with sparse furniture, and without any other items, especially a clock. The interrogator initially builds a rapport with the suspect and then reads him or her their Miranda rights in a manner that discourages the suspect from invoking them. Something like, "We need to get these out of the way so you can tell me your side of the story." And then, once the individual waives their Miranda rights, the interrogator abruptly accuses the suspect of committing the crime and then cuts off any and all denials. The interrogator then tells the suspect that they have physical evidence to prove that the suspect did the crime, even if that's not true. The interrogator then destroys the suspect's confidence, persuading him or her that the only way to end the interrogation is to confess. The interrogator then persuades the suspect that there's a benefit to confessing that outweighs the cost of continued denials. The interrogator makes offers to the suspect to induce him or her to confess, including an appeal to their conscience, as well as perhaps more lenient legal treatment, or the opposite inducement, harsher treatment, if the suspect does not confess. The interrogator then offers the suspect a choice between 2 confessions. One which involves the premeditated, cold-blooded description of how this crime was committed, or a less evil version in which the crime was an accident or impulsive. The interrogator then urges the suspect to pick the latter and to explain that perhaps they were under the influence at the time. The interrogator continues to hammer away, rehashing the scenarios again and again until the suspect finally agrees that he or she did it. To make the confession persuasive, the interrogator will insist that the suspect include details in his or her confession, details only the perpetrator could have known, but these details are often leaked to the suspect during the interrogation through leading questions or showing the suspect photos of the crime scene or other methods. Now, the public broadcasting system did a documentary on the issue of false confessions, and they actually have a video of police using these techniques in the manner that they were trained to get a woman to confess to killing her child, even though she did not kill her child. And that we have a link to that video on PBS included in this week. And I encourage you, after you've watched the videos for the course, to go ahead and take a look at that. It's very powerful. Now, some have suggested that an answer to the police use of coercive psychological interrogation techniques is to have the interrogations videotaped, like in the documentary. And some states have laws that require this, but most are inadequate. Illinois, for example, has a limited statute that provides for videotaping of interrogations, but it only applies to cases of homicides, and it offers police departments a pass if they do not have equipment or their equipment isn't working. So, now, please explore the 4 videos that discuss and provide examples of the systemic causes for wrongful convictions.